Right, I thought I'd do a video about the government's current plan in the UK to restrict knives even more and other things that people use for legitimate reasons. So they have what's basically a ban coming in, and there's several parts to it, and some of the parts I don't really understand because they don't apply to me. But I'll talk about why the whole thing in general is a bad idea. Now, the only bit that I sort of agree with is the acid ban, because thanks to Britain falling apart more and more, it's now a popular thing to do, apparently, to carry around acid in your pocket and then chuck it at people to, scar them for life, because part and parcel of living in the UK. So, yes, I think what they should do is, as much as there's probably legitimate reasons to actually own acid, what they should really be doing, I think personally, is if you're caught with acid with the intent of using it as a weapon, then you should probably just get life in prison. Same as if you were carrying, a knife or gun on you with the intent of murdering somebody with it. It shouldn't really be any different than that, so I'd personally class it just as an offensive weapon if it was held on somebody. And then if there's intent, do them for the intent of using it. However, sadly the government doesn't do that. See, one of the big things I need to point out before we go any further is the British governments are very good at trying to treat symptoms and not the cause of a problem. So, as the medical sort of comparison, if you went to the doctor and you were really sick with a life-threatening disease and the doctor said, rather than actually treating the life-threatening disease, let me give you some painkillers or something like that, that'd be treating a symptom and not the actual, cause. And that's the problem with Britain, is Britain's basically falling apart. It's, gets worse every year in terms of lots of crime rates, police cuts, NHS being cut. So the country, turns more and more into essentially a third world country every day. And what the governments tend to do is think of ways they can hide the figures of what's happening, all the stuff around it, rather than actually deal with the problems themselves. So if the problem is that you've got lots of poor people with nothing to lose running around stabbing each other, you should ban knives. You shouldn't actually look at why people are in, horribly desperate situations, they have all this gang violence or anything else. You should do, you should just ban the knives. It's the same reason they choose to not really use police anymore to actually stop criminals, but they'd rather just use police to try and make money by having the police sit at the side of the road, like literally trying to catch people for speeding to get money in, rather than actually dealing with real criminals, like those who go around stabbing people, throwing acid at people, or whatever else. So yeah, to give you an idea, you have a completely clueless government that just doesn't care. So what they want to propose for the most part, there's a bit about firearms in there as well, and all I'll say is legal firearms are hard enough to get. Legal firearms are barely ever used by criminals. Most criminals will use black market firearms, to commit offences. So you don't need any more restrictions placed on legal firearms, because there hasn't been any crimes committed with legal firearms that they want to propose laws on. So again, it's just them trying to push more draconian policy on the general people than actual laws to change anything. So the main one though is that they want it so that you can't buy a knife. How the law works at the moment is you can't buy a knife unless you're under 18. So they said that's fine, but if you buy them online you don't have to prove your age. Or you do, because you'd have to actually use a credit card or a debit card, most of which you can't get until you're 18. But regardless of that, they want to do it. So what they aren't proposing is, what they should say is that online stores should check your ID. And some of them do that, Blades and Bows do that, and that's absolutely fine. When you register to buy from them, you need to provide them with a passport or, like a driving licence scan that matches all your delivery address and everything else. So that means that, they can check that you're basically legit and you're over 18 buying it. So the issue is, though, is what are the majority of stabbings done with? It's not, zombie knives or any of those weird knives or the wall hanger knives or anything interesting. It's kitchen knives. And if you were living with your parents and under 18, where would you get your knife? Look, I'll show you. So as you can see, the normal kitchen drawer is an arsenal of weapons. There are lots of different types of knives in there, some specifically for cutting up meat, so they'd be good for shanking somebody you don't like. So as you see, this law will do nothing. The majority, as I said, of stabbings are carried out, and you can look this up, with kitchen knives, over 90% of them. And where do those 90% of knives come from? They come from somebody nicking them from a shop, somebody buying them from a shop, where there's already ID laws in place and either they're not checked or the person's over 18 and does it anyway, or they go into their kitchen drawer where their parents have bought knives and they say, oh, I'll pick that one blood, stab somebody with that. So that's how the knife laws work in this country. It's a bit ridiculous. So for example, here's a good example of a knife that would be not banned under this law but made much harder to get. Reproduction Fairbairn Sykes knife. Replica of what Britain used in World War II as commando daggers. Now, this is designed specifically to kill people. Now, the funny thing is, people who go around with the intent of stabbing each other don't use these, they use kitchen knives, even though this would be a lot more efficient. That's not to give the government ideas, but it's, a bit stupid that, again, it's that where they say, like, these stupid zombie knives with all these stupid bits coming off the blade would be good for efficiently killing somebody. They're better at killing people than the kitchen knife. No, they're not. Jack Stryker actually did a good video where he demonstrates that he could chop stuff up better with a kitchen knife than he could with, like a fancy kind of survival knife. But yeah, something like this, stab that into somebody, would work far more efficiently than a kitchen knife. Not that they need to, put further laws on something like this, but it's the stupidity of the thing. Now, there's also another big bit in this about weapons that used to be legal to buy, and then they made them illegal to buy but you could still own them, and now they want it so it's illegal to own them. So they've created a situation where if you legitimately bought something a few years ago, haven't done anything with it, it's just sat in your house, been perfectly legal, now they're wanting to say, actually, that's illegal for you to have that and the police should raid you. That's great logic. Again, and none of these crimes are ever committed with these things. This is the most ludicrous part. And this is things like shurikens, I think there might be knuckle dusters on there, certain types of swords, things that are never used in crimes. I don't see gangs throwing shurikens at each other. Like I said, it's kitchen knife stabbing or acid attacks now. It's none of these really exotic weapons are used. So, it's pretty ridiculous. And this goes back to when Labour were in power. They did a ban on katanas, and the legislation's a bit weird on it. It was like the cheapest katanas you could buy were the ones they would ban. It was if you bought a katana that was not an original or not like a really good hand-forged replica, then they were illegal. But if you just bought some cheapo wall-handed katana to shank somebody with, then that's illegal. Well, you see, the problem was they just banned the katanas but no other swords, but you still don't see anybody committing crimes with swords. So here's a good example of a sword that would not be used in a crime. This is my Heron Armories falchion I had commissioned. This cost me over £400, and the point I'm getting at is if I wanted to hack people up with a sword, this would be incredibly good. I've even got the fighting handguard on this. Sword trap, and you can thrust with it, you can hack with it, you can slam the handguard into somebody's head, crush that in with it. But this isn't covered by the ban at all. Not that it should be, which I want to keep getting at, but something that would be incredibly efficient for killing people isn't covered. And something like this shouldn't be, as I said, because it costs a lot of money, and if you're going to use a knife to kill somebody, you're not going to spend a lot of money on it. You want something you could stab somebody with very cheaply, that everybody has, like a kitchen knife, or maybe some sort of machete that you bought from a garden store, and then you can chuck away, and it's very hard for the police to find, evidence, fingerprints, stuff like that, because it's one of a kind of blade. You wouldn't use something like this, just as you wouldn't be using a zombie knife for the majority of stabbings or killings. It's sort of like, as I was saying, the government treating the symptom, not the cause. They've basically said, oh, look, one stabbing was done with this, therefore it must be this knife. It's, faulty reasoning and stuff like that. But sadly, most people seem to be completely oblivious to the fact that these are more draconian laws put in place to disarm the populace. And a funny thing is, as much as it's not enforced or anything like that as it should be, in the UK Bill of Rights, which is centuries old, people are allowed to own weapons, a bit like the US Second Amendment. But governments have long since stripped those powers away from the populace, even though the civil population has a right to be armed, seeing as there's no police there to protect you, even if they could protect you. But let's leave it with this, to, say how laws don't work. Murder is already illegal. Stabbing people is already illegal. You have all these things that are illegal, but people do it anyway. So why will making certain knives illegal or harder to get actually stop the crimes? It won't. Humans have killed each other, pretty much since the birth of man, and they will find new and interesting ways to do it. If they can't shoot each other, they'll stab each other. If they can't stab each other, they'll bludgeon each other. So I think you get the point that these things are going to do nothing to actually stop people who are, intent on committing crimes. It just simply doesn't work that way. So my point is that this is more draconian laws that are blatantly being put in place to further disarm the populace and, just restrict what people can do. It's not going to cure any of the terrorism or any of the other, symptoms of this actual deep down problems in this country is falling apart over. No, it will just simply be that it's harder for you as a person to do anything you want. That'd be a good knife for doing some field craft with. No, can't buy that. You have to order it into a shop and then go out of your way to the shop to get your ID checked or whatever else. And as mentioning stuff that was perfectly legal to buy years ago, which is now not legal, which totally makes sense. So, as I was saying, this is completely stupid. If you're under 18 and you wanted to kill somebody, all you are going to do is go into your local shop, steal a knife, buy a knife, hope they don't check ID. If they do check ID and they don't sell it you try the next shop and carry on. Or you go into your kitchen drawer where your parents have lots of knives and you say, that'd be the good one to stab with. So, the law won't work. But it will further restrict the freedoms of innocent people, which is what I want to get at. Now, before I come to the end, there is a survey you can take part in if you are a retailer. And if you are a retailer of knives, I blatantly hope you fill it in and say why it's stupid, the rules, and they will not do anything to stop criminals, but just hurt innocent people and your business. But as somebody who's not a retailer, I don't know if you can fill it in or not, but you might as well have a go if you live in the UK and you think this is stupid. Fill out the survey and, repeatedly state that kitchen knives are used in the majority of stabbings, and you could find them in your parents' kitchen drawers if you're under 18, like most of these criminals do. And then, that would be a good enough reason, I guess, for, filling these things in. But, as I get to with the point, I don't think these laws are actually there for public safety. I am very cynical of the UK governments whenever they pass rulings, and I think the most part it is just further disarming and pacifying the population to make it easier to pass more and more draconian laws, because these laws are for your safety. Tell you what you should do, actually. Read George Orwell's 1984, read Ray Bradbury's Fahrenheit 451, read Brave New World, that's Huxley, I think, who wrote that. Read those books, and maybe you'll get a better understanding of governments and governance. Read Machiavelli's The Prince while you're at it as well.